Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Lugo Show, where I study the tactics, practices, and principles of some of my favorite achievers. Today, you will experience Ari Gunzburg, an internationally renowned motivational speaker who is now the author of a new book, The Little Book of Greatness. He has been through a difficult life, a life full of trauma, addiction, suffering, and many, many more. But now he's here to share his story and share what has made him great. So hopefully he can share it with the rest of the world. This conversation was a pretty amazing conversation, and I really recommend it to everyone. Enjoy. Like most of my audience is college students, young professionals, all of these things. And the thing about them is they're trying to figure out this balance. The first one is, and we'll start with the wilderness stuff, is having a calm mind, right? One of the things you've been able to do really well is have just a calm mind, a quiet mind, and really not be distracted by all of the things that are going on in the outside world, social media, distractions, overeating, whatever you want to call it, they're there. And you've been doing that through wilderness. You've been doing that basically your whole life. So I would love for you to explain, first of all, how you've been able to do that. And second of all, why should people have a quiet mind instead of just being constantly stimulated?
I appreciate that you're putting that on me, but the quiet mind, but I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea. With everything in life, it's a work in progress. So I do the best that I can to, maintain calmness and a calm mind and reduce any, we're not talking clinical anxiety, let's say, but let's, reduce any feelings of like, but as with many people and, we can all find this within ourselves. It's a work in progress, and it never, ever happens just like that.
Agreed.
It always takes time. So I'm on my journey as we speak. That doesn't mean that I always get the chance to get out there and go into the wilderness. I always try to, because it takes a lot of time to be able to get out, even just to go for let's say a hike and everything. So let's say you're going to spend an hour in the woods. Depending on how far you're going to drive, it might end up taking you 2 or 3 or 4 hours to go do that. Yeah. Right. If you have to get your stuff ready, and then it takes 20, 25 minutes, let's say, to get to a place. And then you have to set up when you get there and maybe go to the bathroom. And then, you walk for an hour, and then you have to go to the bathroom again. You have to get some water. You have to get this, you drive back, and the next thing you know, it's a few hours. But I mean, it's worth it. It's always worth it. But
that's one of the things that I've been noticing in my life. Like I notice, especially this week, I have a very packed week this week. I've had a very packed week over the last few weeks, and I just feel like I have no time to kick back, no time to relax. And man, it's good. It's good to relax. It's good to have those calm times.
It's not just good. It's important. It's necessary. It's necessary to relax. And so you're in college right now. So there's a certain level of responsibility and a certain level of time demands that you have right now. As you get older and as you move into different periods of your life, it changes drastically, and not usually for the better. Sorry, the time demands I'm talking about, for not for the better, meaning things just get better and better, of course. But as people will maybe get married, or maybe start a family, or maybe adopt, or maybe this, or have a relationship, or all these different things that start going on, every single one of them grabs at people's time like crazy. And so you end up having to figure out how to fit things in, and it doesn't always work. And it can be frustrating. It can be, but you gotta do the best you can, and try and make time for the things that are important. And nature is amazing, but there's also an aspect of being active. So even if you can't get into nature, just being active will help with that calm mind, because we were talking about the calm mind before. Just being a little bit more present in the moment will help with that calm mind, even if you're not able to get out into nature, even if you're not able to exercise. Although I will say that exercise is so important. It is. If you ever notice that you're really antsy, or just really stressed, or anything like that, try and look back in the past few days, past few weeks. Have I gotten out and been active at all? Or am I kind of just cooped up or inside, or just, sitting around and doing not much of anything? We are the way that we're built. We function best when we're active. We function best when we're moving around. I mean, you want to go back, thousands of years, people had to work the farm, and they had to work to this, they had to work to that, and they were active all the time, and they didn't necessarily have as much food. The Rambam, there's an old rabbi who's also a doctor from the 1100s, I believe, about that time. Maybe it was the 1300s. Maimonides. People have heard about him. There's a lot of hospitals named after him. In Hebrew, people would call him the Rambam, which is just an acronym for like the rabbi, I think Moses ben, which means son of, Maimon, which is the Maimonides, right? Maimonides is like the Latin version of son of Maimon. Anyways, the main point of that is that he wrote books on health. And one of the things that he wrote was that, when you eat, never eat I don't know how to say the word, to satiety. Never eat till you're full.
Yeah.
I don't follow that very well, but I will tell you that like the more that we see about health information and everything, he wrote this 800 years ago, 900 years ago, but like the more that we see about health information, the more we see that like people are very, very, very rarely, if ever, getting sick because they didn't eat enough, as long as they're covering their nutritional needs.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not talking malnutrition. I'm not talking somebody who sits there and says, I'm going to go on a crazy diet and do 500 calories a day, which is insane. Right. But I'm saying like if somebody, let's say, needs 2,000 calories a day or whatever and is like just under there or something like that. Right. They'll probably be feeling amazing, be feeling really good. So like he's like, never eat till you're full, because when we eat till we're full, that's kind of, I guess, where we end up getting in trouble.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, it makes a huge difference. And I noticed that just, in general, right? You asked the question, why do people go on their phone so much? Why do people constantly feel the need to eat too much? Why do people constantly do all of these things for, let's call it stimulation? For example, when you go and, you're bored, so you just go on your phone, right? There was actually a great study where they brought people in a room, and for 15 minutes, they said, sit at this desk, sit at this table. Nothing more. Just sit for 15 minutes. And there's only one option, or two options that you could do. Just sit and do nothing, or there's this nice little red button here, and if you press it, it shocks you. What do you think? What do you like? You get the choice. And and something like,
I felt good. I want to do it again.
65% of men shock themselves because we're just
the women, not the women.
30% of women, or I think 20% of women. That
was a shock. Now I want to know. Come on, do the experiment to me. Let's go.
Yeah, right. Like, what's so special about this shock? But that's the thing. Like, we're just in this constant need for. Like, I've come to the realization that when I eat, most of the times I eat because I'm just, I just need something on my lips, or I'm kind of bored, so I just start eating, and I feel this constant need for doing something. Right. And this is one of the big things that, that I guess people in general struggle with, and I struggle with. It's like, what? Why don't we just sit down and relax for a little bit? Why can't we just quiet our minds to the point where for 30 minutes we're just sitting down and just thinking or relaxing or doing nothing? And man, that's the question, in my opinion, of, let's say, the 21st century.
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that I would tell people also, and yourself, myself, I do this myself also. Sometimes it can be hard, especially in our fast-paced society, especially when we have such a little bit of time and we're trying to fit all this stuff in. It can be hard to sit there and say, look, I'm just going to take 10 minutes, I'm just going to take 20 minutes, I'm just going to take 30 minutes, and I'm going to do nothing. No stimulation, no book, no phone, no TV, no food, nothing. That can be really hard. I mean, if you're able to start off doing it for a minute and then expand it to 2 minutes, that's a form of meditation, right? There's many different types of meditation, and you don't have to necessarily do anything. And people I think incorrectly, I believe. I wrote a book by this guy, I think Andy Puddlecombe, which is like Headspace. Okay. And so he tells a fascinating story about how he ended up in a few different monasteries. He had to escape over the wall, like crazy stuff. He's got great stories from like when he was becoming a monk and learning how to meditate. But one of the most fascinating things that he said is that he was sitting there, he's trying to like sit there and empty his mind of everything. Mm-hmm. And one of the I forget what you would call it, one of the higher ups, the abbot, maybe, whatever, one of the people that were there for longer than him was like, stop trying to make your mind empty, just sit and observe, meaning don't control your thoughts, meaning there's a
Yeah.
big difference between, people are like, oh, I want to get to the empty, and they can't do it, and they try and they can't do it. It's like, forget it, meditation is not for me.
Yeah.
But a better way to put it is to just figure out how to like not control your thoughts and just observe. And the way that the way that his mentor described it to him, and now I'm going to describe that way to you, is that he said, imagine that you are an observer by a busy street. So you could stand in the middle of the street and try and wave the cars down and say, you go to the left and you go to the right and you go this way. Now you guys stop, and now this intersection goes. And that's what we're doing all the time, basically. Instead, walk over to the side of the road, sit down, and just watch. And so I'm not always able to do that. But the places that I found myself most able to do that is on the acupuncture table. Mm-hmm. Right? You walk in, the acupuncturist sits you down. They ask if anything's going on. Yes, no, whatever. They put needles in certain places, and then they leave you alone for 20 minutes, for an hour, depending on the session, depending on the acupuncturist. And in those times have always been the times when I've been most successful at not controlling my thoughts. And it's fascinating to see what's going on, like, because there's the whole level of, I guess, of subconscious and everything. But that's okay. So anyways, so the main point of all that was, it's very hard to have the time and to make the time and to find the time to sit there and do nothing for, let's say, 30 minutes, but you can start with a small amount and increase it. That's first of all. Yeah. Second of all, when you put yourself into a position where you don't have additional stimuli, you can get a very similar feeling. Maybe it's not quite as good as like meditating by yourself in a place, whatever, but you can get yourself close. And ways that I find to do that are like going on walks by myself, going on hikes by myself. Just, you can put yourself into these positions, and then you're like kind of killing two birds with one stone, right? If you sit there and you go to a local park and you walk for like an hour and you're by yourself and you're not pulling your phone out and you're not looking at it and you're not doing anything like that, so you do have stimuli, because there's the trees and there's the birds, and maybe if you're walking by a river, there's the water, and maybe if you're walking by a lake, or there maybe you'll see other people on the road. But overall, you're alone, you're by yourself, you're able to sit there and let your thoughts flow. There are a lot of books that will talk about a lot of things, and one of the things, I'm trying to remember which book it was that I read it in, but taking walks to allow your mind to sit there and process things. Like, people often don't realize the value of that.
Well, that's the thing. So you brought up some incredible points there, and I think every single point that you brought there, like I was letting you go because every single point would, like, it supported one underlying point, which is just that the paradox of trying, the futility of trying. So, for example, have you ever tried to fall asleep? Like you're laying in your bed and
my daughter tries every night. She's like, I'm trying, I can't do it. I'm like, just lay there and close your eyes and just let it go,
and just let go, right? Like there's trying to focus. Right? If you're trying to focus, you sit down, you say, okay, maybe I've been distracted for the last 30 minutes, but I'm just going to sit down and focus now and go. It's like, nope, that doesn't work. Right? And trying to meditate, right? Trying to meditate. And this gets back to this exact point is, well, a paradox, because what you're really saying is, I'm trying to let go. And if you're trying to let go, because you know that you need to let go, trying to let go is by definition a paradox, because to let go, you need to let go of trying. And that's sort of where you're at. So I think this is the root of the problem. And this is exactly what you're saying is, as you go deeper, you start to realize that the more we try to do things, the longer we work, the more work we have to do, the more responsibilities that we take up, the more we have to try to do things. And unfortunately, then we lose the ability to let go. We lose the ability to quiet our minds, because our mind is quiet when we're not trying anything. So, to bring that all the way back around, it's just, like quieting your mind, calming down your mind partially requires the letting go of trying itself.
Yeah, I love what you're saying over there. The paradox of, we have to both try and let go at the same time. It's a really good point, and the more that we're able to, it's interesting. In the program, they have a saying, right? And, they have the saying in the real world also. Live and let live is the real world. And then you'll have, like, in people who are in 12-step programs might say things like live and let God,
Yep.
right? Now, taken into context, just to give a little bit of backstory for people who are not familiar with it, like, I have family members. Part of my backstory involves the program in certain ways, in very interesting ways. But basically, one of the tenets of the 12-step programs is the recognition of a higher power.
That's step
So,
one. Yeah.
oh, it's step one. Okay, I guess yeah, I
I
don't
know.
know the steps.
Step one is realize that you're not in control of your situation. It's
Okay.
literally number one.
Yeah, so I'm saying, but like, so for some people that means God. For other people, that doesn't necessarily mean God. It might mean something like, it might mean that they just recognize that there's, like, let's say, Mother Nature or whatever. But the main point, so that's what I'm saying. So just because I said live and let God, I don't want anybody to sit there and laugh and be like, bah, ha, ha, I'm an atheist, so it doesn't mean anything. Just, it's okay to recognize that there are powers greater than ourselves. And, if you want to call that nature, then, fine. But, sometimes you just got to, like, live and let go, right? You got to live and let things happen. And it's really, really hard because we always want to be in control. We always want to be trying to do what we're trying to do. And a lot of times the more we put into it, the less we'll take out of it. So sometimes we kind of just have to, like, take a step back and say, okay, I'm just going to let this, happen. I'm just going to let this go.
And that's one of the most important things that I realized in my life. It's like, what happens if you're always trying to be in control and you're always turned on and you're always trying to do things? Anxiety. Anxiety is a natural reaction because what happens is, let's say you're working, doing things, feeling things, all of this, and then you get to a place of boredom. Right? You get to a place of, oh, wait, I'm not doing anything. There's no work left for me to do, anything like that. When you get to that point, you're like, holy crap, like, what do I do now? Right? Like, I need to be trying. I need to be doing something. And that's why we have, in my opinion, something like the distractions that exist in our society, right? Because when you're sitting there and you're like, okay, you know what? I'm so bored. I have nothing to do. I have no place to go mentally. Well, let me just distract myself with something so I can focus on it. Because when you're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, you're not distracted. You're highly focused, right? Those things that is the whole, it releases a tremendous amount of dopamine, right? Dopamine is the neurochemical modulator of focus, right? You realize that when you're on your phone, you're literally tuning out the rest of the world. You are highly, highly focused. And the whole idea behind that is, well, it sort of lets go of that existential dread that we have, that underlying anxiety. Because if you're focused on that screen, if you're focused on exactly that one thing, then you don't have to worry about the underlying anxiety.
Yeah, so I mean, you're probably seeing some facial expressions on here about this concept of, like, people being highly, highly focused when they're on Instagram or things like that. And I think I'm recognizing that. I think you're right that they are highly focused, but it's a weird type of focus. Meaning,
Yes.
If you and I started working on a project together, let's just say, right?
Mhm.
And things were just clicking and things are just moving, and we get into this point and, like, everything's just working really, really well. We're highly, highly focused,
Mhm.
but we're highly focused and we're in that what people call the state of flow.
Yep.
And that place, like, when we can get into that state of flow, like, we are so charged up, we have so much energy just coming through every single bone in our body, and we're just, everything's working. And just for people who haven't experienced the state of flow, it's hard to describe, but
Yeah.
it
But
it
everyone
puts
has. That's the thing.
yeah, I mean, it's so energizing, right? But I don't know that anybody has ever flipped through Instagram, flipped through Twitter, flipped through their Facebook feed. Yes, they're highly focused. Yes, they're ignoring the world around them. Yes, it seems like the most important thing on the table right that second. I don't think it's a healthy focus. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I don't think it's the type of focus where it's like, oh yeah, wow, like, I feel really great about myself about the fact that I just sat there and looked through TikTok videos for the past hour.
Actually,
I think it's like, okay,
yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
I mean, there are a lot of studies on it. So I read the book, I can never pronounce his name, but the guy who created it, I'll call him Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I think that's what his name is, but he's the guy who created the concept of flow. He wrote a whole book on flow, and I read it. Highly suggest. Actually, I don't really highly suggest it. I really didn't like it that much, but it has some good concepts. You could probably get it. There's so much content online that you could find it there, but you could find it on blog posts and all that.
I usually non-fictions because I don't like reading non-fictions.
Yeah, no, I mean,
so I usually listen to them when I'm driving.
Which is fine. And you know what? Like, to be honest, I really do not suggest his book. Like, I really
don't ever ask him to be a guest on your show.
I won't. But I'm a very honest person, and I thought it was so, like, he fit 20 pages worth of content into 300 pages, and I hate.
Okay. It was tedious. Get the Cliff Notes.
Tedious, yeah. Just get the Cliff Notes. That's my
right. Meaning he had good ideas. So I've seen books like that before, where like, you get it, and I saw it, and I saw the guy's name in one place, and I saw his book in other places, and I know that his book was highly praised. So I got another one that was like this from the same series, and then I was like looking at reviews, and people were like, "This is basically the first book, just rewritten with a new cover and a new name," and I'm like. Yeah, forget it.
I'm not a fan. I'm not. But anyways, so he brought in a lot of good studies, and I thought it was really great. One of the things about flow, right, is that in flow you are immersed, right? You are completely immersed. Right now we're in this conversation, and you realize there are probably a lot of sounds that are going on around you. All of these things. I haven't been paying attention to any of them because I'm so immersed in this conversation. We could even say we're in a state of flow, right, or not super flow, but we're in flow, But when you're on social media, you're also immersed, right? You're also completely it's the only thing you're focusing on. You lose track of other conversations, like all of these things. But at the same time, when you're in a flow state, it is actually a good experience. Like, people are enjoying it. Csikszentmihalyi even calls it one of the keys to happiness. But there are studies that when you're scrolling on social media, if someone were to ask you, how are you feeling right now? Even though you're completely focused, you are not happy. It is not an enjoyable experience.
So, I mean, being engaged, right? Being present in the moment, like what you're talking about, like in the conversation, not focus on any other stimulus any other stimuli, whatever, because you're so engaged in what's going on, right? First, that's a state that I try to bring myself into when I can, by going out into nature and things like that. But it's also one of my set of 5 keys to greatness, because it is so important. I mean, I don't call it a state of flow. It's not really the same thing in the sense that, like, you don't have to be in a state of flow to be fully engaged with what's going on.
Yep.
And I'll explain, right? When I'm washing the dishes, I don't feel like I'm in a state of flow. Like, I don't feel like things are just working. But I can be fully engaged in what I'm doing. And, so maybe you don't always want to be, but I'm saying it's the more that you can be engaged in what you are doing that's right in front of you, and the less distractions that you have, I'm going to say on the table in front of you, but I don't mean on the table. I'm just looking at the table right now. But the less distractions that you have all over you, like, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. I don't want to throw in too many like Buddhist quotes, because I know too many people aren't really into Buddhism. But one of the big parts about Buddhism is being in the present moment, right? Like, being in the present moment. There's a great quote that I really love. It's like, Buddhism doesn't confuse spirituality with thinking about God while peeling the potatoes. Instead, Buddhists just peel the potatoes. And I really like that. Like, I really think that there's such a strong idea in just like where you are right now is the best thing that's possible.
Just be.
And I've like, it's funny because you don't realize that until you realize that. Like, I used to like understand, I used to think that I understood like what being in the present moment felt like. And then there was just like maybe 3 times in my life, one happened like 3 weeks ago, where I'm just sitting there and I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to let go. Like, I'm going to let go. And part of it is me trying to let go. Part of it is me actually letting go. And, it only really works when I actually do let go. And I'm just so immersed in the present moment where like I could hear all the sounds around me, all the little sounds and, the little footsteps and creaks and, like I see all the movement going on and the bug in the corner, like all of these things. I feel like I become super conscious. And and it actually overwhelms me. Every time I get that feeling, I get goosebumps. It
I was
is
gonna say when we were talking about flow before, I was gonna say like one way to potentially describe it, right? With at least from the perspective that like somebody's in a state of flow because they're in the middle of like some type of creation,
mhm.
I would almost call it like almost like touching God. And I don't
Mm.
mean that like we're able to physically touch something that's a spiritual manifestation or whatever you want to call it. Or, there's a lot of ways you can break that down and say, no, it's not true. But, um, for people who are religious, right, there's the concept of creation, right? Creationism and all that, whatever you want to call it. So when we get into that state of flow and everything falls to the wayside because we're in this moment of, I'm creating this and I'm creating this and just it's all working and it's all clicking and it's all going, I feel like there's an aspect of, you know,
Spirituality.
yeah, like there, yeah. I mean, for people
Yeah.
who,
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to water it down, but yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. Like it is actually a spiritual experience when you're immersed in something. It's not just, just I'm not just doing homework. I am my entire being is on this paper, and it is we're in a negotiation. We're talking to each other and we're communicating, and it's not just, just doing homework. It's so much more than that.
absolutely.
Yeah. That I like that. I like that. So, um it's really interesting. Like we talk about these states, right? We talk about these states, and one of them is this letting go. Another one is this flow, right? And I would like to call these optimal states, right? Like you think about it, and there are a thousand other states you could be in, including scrolling on social media, that sort of mindless scrolling state, you know? And I guess I have just a question. What other optimal states do you sort of experience in your daily life? Which states do you really try to get to?
Uh, I'm going to answer with which states do I try to get to? I mean, I don't know. That's a great question. So
I know it's an abstract question, but I'm
it's
sitting
it's
here.
it's it is an abstract question, and it's also very difficult because I have I have four little kids. So it's the optimal state that I try to get in when I'm around them is not losing, meaning to stay calm and to not lose your mind,
Yeah,
'cause
yeah.
it can get hectic here and there. So
I
so
wouldn't call that too much of an optimal state. I
no,
mean,
right. But
but that's the thing, right? Like I would call, I see this all the time, and the reason why I'm sort of bringing up this prompt is because I usually think of what states am I trying to avoid? This is usually the mindset that I'm in, which is, I find myself getting distracted. And when I'm distracted, I'm like, oh, I really can't be in that state. But I'm really trying to think of what are the optimal states in which I should be in. And I'm thinking another one is love, right? Like when you're around your kids, I'm sure you've had those experiences. Probably since they're young and since you have four of them, they it comes a little less often. Just complete gratitude and complete appreciation of exactly where you are.
so you're calling them states. I think that's where maybe I'm falling apart with the question is because
Hmm.
you mentioned love and gratitude, and so those I feel like are a little bit more on the level of emotion and less on states. I'm saying so. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. But when you don't talk yourself too much out of distraction, and here are the caveats with that, because play is incredibly important,
Yes.
right? People don't recognize that, and people don't want to people lose out on play a lot of times because they don't give themselves that opportunity, and because they think that they're not allowed to be distracted, they always have to be performing.
Hmm.
But it's through play that we have the strength and we have the wherewithal to perform. And when we're not able to play, when we're not able to sit there and give ourselves that outlet, when we're not able to give ourselves that ability to sit there and just like let it all go and just do something else and just get distracted in a positive way,
Yep.
we're not able to function. And so if you're getting on your own case about being distracted because you're flipping through social media, fine, no problem. That's I would agree with what you're saying there. But if you're talking about, let's say, going to the field and playing football with a bunch of friends, or playing soccer, or playing baseball, or playing going to the swimming pool and horsing around. I mean, there's whatever, pick anything that you want that involves like, a bunch of people laughing and social aspects and stuff like that. You might do better like allowing yourself to have some distractions here and there, because it will, I mean, the cliche sayings are so cliche, but a lot of times they're true, right? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. It goes a little bit further than that. And if you're only working and you're not playing, you don't have the inner strength and the inner patience and the inner everything to sit there and have I think that when we're playing more, we're more able to get ourselves into like a state of flow. We're more able to get ourselves into that state of productivity. We're more able to, some of the times that I'm most productive is when I'm sitting there and I've got, the exercise lined up and the play, and, and so a lot of times I'll try to do the exercise and the play at the same time. Like, why not? Like if I can, whatever, COVID's messed up everything. And so is the move that we did a little while ago. But, if you can go play a game of basketball and you're hitting the play aspect of it and you're hitting the exercise aspect of it, right? We need that time. We need that time, and people don't give themselves that time, which is the craziest thing. It is what it is, but we really need that play time in order to
yeah. So actually, it's really interesting. First of all, I've never heard that phrase before. You call it a cliche, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. I like that.
It's an old one.
Really? Yeah.
I'm dating myself over here.
I'm a bit of a young
I wouldn't be shocked if it came from like the 1800s.
but that's the thing. It's really funny because, I've been through many periods in my life. Obviously, I'm 20, and I find that every year I'm sort of like bouncing.
Recorded as early as 1659.
1659. Yep. I'm only 20, so I haven't experienced
right.
I'm
saying,
but but that's the thing, like I've noticed
nobody made a meme out of it, I don't know it. Okay.
So, but I think it actually rings true, and like that actually like filled in a nice little puzzle piece for me, because when I think about my life, I think about my sort of there was one year where I was dogmatically Christian. So like, not like Christian how it was intended to be, more like Christian, like, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So, basically I focused on my work. I focused on what I called my duty. I was, quote, self-sacrificial, which a lot of Christian dogma makes you do, really sacrifice yourself for other people and really never focus on your self-interest, which is one of the most anti-human things ever, by the way. Especially if it doesn't align with your own interest. And then, I was just focused on being a crazy entrepreneur. And I realized that by the end of that year, I lost part of my humanity. All work and no play. When I lost the ability to play, and I realized that part of what I was trying to do was turn myself into a robot. And that's part of what capitalism does. That's part of what, striving to do things was. I know you have your facial expressions, but I got to explain it better. So, I was trying to, let's say I'm trying to be the most efficient person possible, right? I'm trying to be an entrepreneur, all work and no play. If I'm trying to be an efficient entrepreneur, I'm never going to be as good as a robot. A robot is going to focus for 100 hours a week. Let's assume there are 100 hours. I think it's like 107. And it's not going to sleep.
Because like 168, but yeah.
Yeah, 168. It's going to focus for 168 hours a week, and it's going to never sleep and work productively, be in a flow state, if that even exists for a robot, the whole time. But humans, we're fallible, right? We're not as efficient as possible. But no matter what, if you're striving to get a goal, then you're going to strive to be as efficient as possible. And if you're all work and no play, then you're essentially trying to imitate a robot. You're going to spend your entire life trying to imitate this robot. And what I realized is, okay, you know what? I could do that. I could work the 8-hour weeks. I could work the 90-hour weeks. I could do it. But I'm going to lose my humanity in the process. I'm going to lose that part of me, that state of play, that state of, being immersed in my friends and family and all of these things. And essentially, I'm going to lose my humanity.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack over there. So a few things. So first of all, yeah, absolutely. If we are trying to force ourselves to work like a robot, we will not function well. Second of all, if we are approaching religion, and let's say any religion, in the self-sacrificial mode, and I mean nothing, and I'm going to only do for the community, and I'm just going to sit there and like just say yes and just take on all these projects, it's never going to work. Inevitably it will lead to our own burnout. Now, does that mean that we have to say no to everything? Not at all, right? My one of my wife's mentors told her, one time, because she was like talking about this, and then she's like, if you don't do for you, who's going to do for you?
Yeah.
you know and it's not to say that you're not allowed to have somebody in your life, like in a relationship, that's taking care of you and that's watching out for your best interests, of course. But you also need to watch out for your best interests, and if you're being self-sacrificial, you're not watching out for your best interests, and not only will you suffer, but the entire world will suffer.
Yeah.
Because if you are not functioning, then everybody around you is going to be suffering for that. And you brought up and you said capitalism makes people do that. I would argue strongly that it's not capitalism that makes people do that. It's people thinking that they need to be the next Elon Musk, maybe, that creates that. Capitalism. What ends up happening with capitalism is that, in a nutshell, to a degree, is that people can be selfish for themselves, which overall ends up being good for humanity, right?
Yes.
In a capitalistic society, I can be selfish in the sense that I want to sit there and try and build a business that creates a lot of money, right? I can't do that without hiring people, without giving people a good working wage, without now of course you have the monsters in capitalism who will sit there and be like, well, yeah, my company is grossing $800 million a year, but I'm only going to pay you $8 an hour, right? That happens. But in a true capitalistic society, what'll end up happening is that the other companies, like, no, we value our workers and we value their time. We want to make sure that they're taken care of. So we're going to pay them $20 an hour. And the person who's like, I'll pay you $8 an hour, people will be like, I'm not working for you. The problem comes in when things start. There's a lot of there's a
Yes.
lot to unpack there, but
There's a
when
lot.
people start to try to influence things in certain ways, and then change things in certain ways, what ends up happening, I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, right, if you needed somebody to come and help you move stuff around, let's say, for a moving job, or just to, move a TV to the basement or something, you could offer $10 an hour cash, and people would jump at the opportunity. 10 years goes by, 20 years goes by, whatever it was, and I was trying to find some people to help me and everything. And in my head, it was still $10 an hour, but I guess, inflation and this is not talking about the jump in inflation that's been happening lately. This is just talking about the what happens over 20 years. Money, you need more money to do the same amount of stuff over. That's, it's known, like there's a known figure. Typically they try to keep inflation at 2 to 3% per year. And I'm like looking around and they're like $20 an hour minimum. And I'm like, oh, and then I realized, like, but again, right. Um, that's happening because of supply and demand, right? There are people who are willing to be the supply at $20 an hour, but at $10 an hour, they're just not willing to do it. But that's one thing. But one thing also you mentioned is being very goal oriented. I just recently finished listening to Scott Adams' book called How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big. And
I like that.
It's a fantastic book, and it's interesting to read or to listen to. And he goes through a lot of stuff in there, and it's just like a lot of like his thought processes and what he went through in his life and different things. And some of the stuff that he talks about is systems, not goals. Because when we're running after goals, we're constantly in a state of failure, basically. Okay, my goal is to let's say, run a marathon is I feel like is a good goal that you can work within the system. And it's a stepping stone, that just sits there and says, this is what I want to actually do, so I'll sit there and use a system to do it. So it's not a good goal. But let's say your goal is like, I want to create $1 million company. Every single day that you don't have $1 million company, you are in, I guess, failure of your goal, in the sense that, like, you haven't done it yet. And even if you sit there and spend the next 3 years working on that and you achieve that goal, the second you achieve that goal, then what? Right? But if you sit there and you say, I want to be successful in business, and so I'm going to find systems that will help me be successful in business, then you can start to create systems that will allow you to be successful in business. I need to work every single day. I need to sit there and take steps forward every single day. However you define your systems, right? So it's not goals anymore. It's just, I need to sit there and spend this much time on building my business every single day. It's 2 hours in the middle of the night. It's 2 hours in the early morning. It's this, whatever it is that you're trying to build a skill. So you build a system around it. One of the best examples I think that, he talks about diet and weight and exercise and stuff like that is when somebody says, I have a goal of losing 10 pounds. Right? You're in a state of failure until you lose the 10 pounds. And then if you gain the weight back, you're in a state of failure again. If you have a system of I eat healthy and here's how I do it, and I'm active every single day. Well, so if your weight fluctuates a little bit, well, you're not in a state of failure. You're still following your system. You're eating overall healthily. You're exercising every single, you know what I'm saying? So it just,
I've been experimenting with that for a while now. So for the last probably like year and a half, I've been goal-less, right? And I've been using the systems approach in which you've been using. And I noticed that, first of all, it helps with burnout tremendously, right? Like, let's say right now. So recently I have my family coming over on Thursday. Today is Tuesday. So I set a goal to get stuff done by the time I see my family. So I've noticed that I set that goal on Sunday. I've noticed that in the last 2 days, I've been stressed. My motivation has declined. Like it's actually declined, which is really funny. But yeah, like burnout, stress, all of these things. And it's like, it hurts, and I'm like, if I live like this for the rest of my, for the next 2 weeks, like by the third week, I'll be, sleeping for 20 hours a day and hoping to never wake up, like it's, it's intense. So probably not that much, but you know what I mean? So, but that's the thing. So I've been using the systems approach, but the problem I find with the systems approach is it just doesn't get as much done because, or at least for me, it doesn't get as much done because when you really think about it, every single company structure that's ever existed that has worked has had goals. Every single human or many humans, like you look at the people who make it to the top of YouTube charts, for example, that's the people that I usually look at. They had a goal to be at the top of the YouTube charts, like there's this guy named Mr. Beast on YouTube. And one of his big things was he would say every single day, I am going to be the number one YouTube channel. Muhammad Ali would say, I'm going to be the number one boxer.
I would just make a point. That's an affirmation more so than a goal. Does that make sense?
No.
Meaning, so I highly recommend you grab that book because he tells his experiences with affirmations. But you sitting there and saying every single day, I will be XYZ is an affirmation. You're right. It is, to a degree, it's like a goal, right? Because that's what you're shooting for. That's what you're striving for. But it's, I don't know, a goal I think of, I guess, a little bit more as like a target on the wall. And that's kind of a target, but like saying it every single day is like kind of like an affirmation, like I'm going to be this. So then like it kind of like aligns the whole, whether or not they actually work, read the book. I'm saying he talks about it. He brings up a few examples where they did work for him, even though he was skeptical. But like, when you sit there and say every single day, I'm going to be, a best-selling author, let's say, I'm going to be a this, I'm going to be a this. It's repeating a mantra in your mind in a sense, and so it focuses you on that outcome. You can do it through, I guess I'm saying you can do it through goals, or you can do it through systems. I'm saying, like, as a, for instance, the best-selling author, right? Well, how are you going to be a best-selling author, right? So when you're repeating it to yourself every single day, you're hopefully putting yourself in a mindset that's going to find things that will like help that happen. But if your goal is to be a best-selling author, I mean, if you're not writing, you're not doing anything towards your goal. But if your system is, I write every single day, that's my system, right? Some days are going to be better than others. I'm going to be in more of a state of flow on day 1 and not day 3. Yeah, I mean, so I don't, I guess another way to put it is I don't necessarily fully understand or fully grasp. Like as soon as I finished the book, I meant to listen to it again or possibly get a copy of it and read it. But I don't necessarily fully grasp this whole fine line between goals and systems. But the way you're putting that, it and based on this one particular book, without going into others and everything, it seems like that would maybe be more of an affirmation, which is very helpful. And based on what I heard from him, I would highly recommend you do. But
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of what I've been experiencing. So what I did was in the past, so for this last year and a half, I've been very productive and getting a lot of stuff done. Published my book, lecture series, professional hypnotist. I have a bunch of stuff going on, plus this podcast. So I've been doing really well with getting stuff done, and I've been pretty, we'll call it hyper productive. And a lot of it has been system based. So I will say that, like, I've gotten a lot of stuff done using the system approach. I'm going to get X much done in X much time and blah, 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 and it really works. The only problem I have is that it's not outcome based. So for example, when I use the systems approach, I don't end up having a marketing goal. So for example, I say, okay, I'm going to write 2 hours a day, right? But then I'm not saying to myself, I'm going to have X many followers. I'm going to have X many people that buy my book. I'm going to have X many people that do this, this, and that. Because the only way that you could really motivate yourself, in my opinion, to do that, actually, no, I guess it's not the only way, but I could see how you could use the systems approach for it. But yeah, like, it makes so much sense to just be like, I'm going to have the most followers, and I'm going to align all my goal structures towards this goal and say, I'm going to have the most followers by the end of this. I'm sure you could say, I'm going to post on Twitter every single day, and I'm going to produce X much content, all that stuff. But the goal approach just seems so much more direct.
yeah, another thing also is, I feel like you can use goals in a business maybe a little bit more than you can use than typical. Like, to sit there and make a goal for your life, like, I'm going to have 10,000 followers on Instagram, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great, but, you actually have to get 10,000 followers on Instagram in order to be in a state. But, to sit there and say, from a business perspective, we're going to, our projections for this year are that we're going to make $10,000 a month, 15, 20, $100,000 a month, whatever. When you don't make that, right, and if it's a realistic projection, when you don't make that, you can sit there and sit down with some of your business people and be like, well, great, we had this goal, business goal, we didn't hit it. Let's talk about it and try and figure out what happened. Yeah. Why is it that we're not hitting it? And then that's something to, like, discuss. But when you're doing it with your own life, like, you constantly have to be setting targets and constantly be striving towards the targets. And every single second that you're not there, you're in a state of failure. And then as soon as you get there, you need to set a new target. Otherwise, your entire life falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then so you're working towards a goal for 3 months, and then you hit it. And then you're like, amazing, I hit my goal. What now?
Well, that's the anxiety.
Versus systems, right? Oh, well, I eat healthy. Well, 3 months later that you've lost the 10 pounds, let's just, whatever, as an example. Well, so 3 months later, you lost the 10 pounds, but you could still keep on eating healthy, because it's not like, wow, I achieved my goal, now I can eat more, right? No, my system is that I eat healthily.
Well, so it's more like, yeah, now I achieve my goal, and now I'm not striving for anything, so I'm not as motivated,
right.
Yeah. It makes sense. It's God, if you could put that together for marketing, then that would be wonderful. Because yes, I suck at marketing, and I've resorted to goals. That's why I recently did the goals for Thursday, and
it also depends on what you call them. Like, you don't have to necessarily call them goals. You could just call it a plain old to-do list. I have a lot of times, like, when I'm going into a holiday or when I'm going into a vacation, and I don't really want to worry about certain things during it. And I know that I have, let's say, 50 tasks that I have to take care of. I have to do this I have to do this with the car, and I have to take care of this errand, and I have to take care of this errand, and I have to get the shirts from the cleaners, and I have to get this, and I have to, follow up at this client about this, and I want to get this part of the project out. And so what'll end up happening is, sometimes when I'm, like, hyper productive like that, I'll just resort to a written list, which you'd be surprised at how
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 effective it
useful
is. Yeah.
how useful, right, a written list is, and you just sit there and you just dump this whole list down and just like brainstorm, like, what are the things that I actually have to do? Get it out of your head, get it onto paper. If you want to later move it electronically, no problem, but get it onto paper. And then as you're working through things, just start crossing it off. And if your list starts getting too unwieldy to handle because some stuff is crossed and some stuff isn't, move it to new paper, right? Get rid of all the
Yeah.
stuff that you've already done. And what you'll end up finding, so it, what you'll end up finding is that you're hyper productive. I mean, there's people who talk about it. Eat That Frog, I think, by Brian Tracy. He talks about this, that like right before vacation we're the most productive, because I think what it comes down to is because we're like, okay, I only have 10 hours to do stuff. Here's my list of stuff that has to get done. Let me get it done. So a lot of times we get all of it done. Sometimes we don't get all of it done. And so what'll end up happening is like your goal, I don't know how you define your goal, but let's say for Thursday, you define your goal as, I just want to be able to focus on my family. So if you wrote everything down on a piece of paper, you might start looking at that and say, yeah, you know what? This is not that important. I can let this, your family's, let's say, leaving next week, right? I can let that sit until next week.
Yeah.
This is not that important. I can let that sit till next week. And you just sit there and you go through your list, you prioritize it. You say, these are the 8 things that I have to do. These are the extra 8 things that it would be great if I could do them. And these are the 8 things that if I have time, I'll get them done, but like, they're just not that important. And that takes a lot of that stress of like, I have 50 things that I have to do before my family gets here. I got to do it all now. And turns it into here's my priorities list. And you can call it a goals list, but that might just be stressful. You can call it a to-do list and just say, these are some small tasks that I have to do. And another thing is that the number one thing to do is to do what works for you. And if working in goals works for you, and I probably did not do his concept of systems, not goals, justice when I briefly explained it right now. But if working in goals works for you, then do it. And if working in goals doesn't work for you, then don't do it. Like it's like that. A
Well,
lot
that's the
of
thing.
people.
So I just
Yeah.
noticed there are a lot of drawbacks, right? There are a lot of drawbacks from each strategy. So what I do is, and I just realized this right now. So I actually have, I do a lot of like rushing, right? So you just brought up a great point where you said that you're most productive before vacation. And I asked the question, and the reason why I have so much stuff going on this week is because I'm essentially going on a vacation. My family's coming over and I'm not working for the weekend. So I'm hyper productive from Monday through Thursday, and then from Thursday through Sunday I'm going to be just chilling with my family. And I realized that the thing that makes me hyper productive is that I have to squish a lot of things in a small amount of time. So that gives me motivation, right? That's just exactly what you said. I'm just restating it. Now, the next part is I realized that as a young person, entrepreneur, getting started, all of these things, I realized that I try to set goals to achieve things quicker than I'm supposed to. So, for example, I want to have X amount of things by the time I'm 25, right? 25 is really my age. And then as a result, I feel like I'm always in a rush. So, because I'm like, oh, I need to get this by 25, I need to get this by 25, I need to get this by 25, I need to have X by the time I graduate, I need to have X by the time I'm 25. And I was talking to one of my mentors, his name is Maurice Bretzfield. I had him on the podcast too before. And he asked me why I didn't want to go study abroad. And I told him, I go, it's because I have stuff to do, right? It's because I have plans to achieve and I have to get X done by the time I'm 25, essentially. And I realized that that's the same exact psychology. That's the same exact psychology. As the vacation, right? The vacation is, oh, I'm short on time, therefore I need to rush a lot of things into a short period of time. So let's say I set a goal to be essentially ahead of schedule, but I have X done by the time I'm 25. Then what I'm essentially doing is using that same psychology as a motivational technique without even knowing it.
I'm just wondering if a person is able to stay in that state of extreme getting stuff done for years at a time. Obviously, it would be great if we could.
Yeah.
But I just wonder like if that does not contribute to burnout. And I will tell you, just coming from my own experiences, I wasn't necessarily as goal oriented as you were when I was younger, but I can tell you that the things that you'll regret the most as you get older are the things that you could have done that you just didn't do because you were too busy. So if you actually have an opportunity to go study abroad, dude, there's not going to be a better time in your life, right? I'm saying you're not going to be in college forever, right? So you can sit there, you can go to Europe, yeah, and if you end up achieving those goals and you're a multimillionaire by the time you're 25 or 30 or 35 or whatever, you can go to Europe and you can live it up in a totally different way, right? But the experiences that you get, and it could be that it's not even relevant now with COVID and everything, but the experiences that you get from, going to Europe and staying in cheap hostels and, I mean, take care of yourself and be wary, and, don't bring very expensive electronics necessarily, but the experiences that you get from doing stuff like that, I can't speak from experience because I didn't do it, but I should have done it, right? I mean, like I was sitting around, I was doing nothing, whatever. I was like 20, 22 years old. Like, why the hell did I not sit there and take $1,000 and just get on a plane and go hang out in Europe for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, like that was an experience that I could have had that I just didn't do. And so, you'll never get that opportunity back. So don't, when you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing and I've got to get this done, I've got to get this done, I've got to get this done. You're not gonna, you're gonna miss out on things, and you're gonna look back and you're gonna be like, you'll have people who did go abroad, and you'll be like, man, it seems like they really had a good time. You have people who did go backpacking in Europe. You'll have people who did go, learn how to ski. You'll have people who did go learn how to do that. Like it doesn't make, you don't have to do somebody else's life. And if going abroad doesn't make sense for you, then don't do that. That's not the point. The point is, if you have something you're really interested in, but you're putting it off because you'll have more time later, don't expect you'll have more time later. Do it now.
Yeah. Well, this actually ties it together really well, because this is what I've been noticing in my own life. So what you just said is essentially, don't be too focused that you miss the rest of the world, right? Don't be too focused that you miss out on the experience. And we were talking about focus before, and I realized that I tend to do that. I tend to be hyper focused, and that's part of it. Like some people are addicted to nicotine, some people are addicted to heroin. Like I just love my work, and maybe we could even say that's the difference between positive and negative focus, like we were talking about before. Of course, if you're focused on getting heroin, you're really focused, and if you're focused on on working hard, then you're really focused. But one's positive and one's negative. But then at the same time, that might be the problem of focus in general. The problem of focus in general is that you tune out the rest of the world. And maybe that means I should study abroad. God damn. All right, whatever.
Again, right? So study abroad might be a bad example because maybe you don't want to do it. If you're on the fence about whether or not to go, and you have the resources to do it,
or just go for less time. Yeah, just go for 2 weeks. Yeah.
Look, I'm saying, you have responsibilities, but like, compared to when you're going to be older and you're going to have all sorts of responsibilities, you have very little to no responsibilities relative to.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, as long as you're hitting your college classes, like, the rest of your life is all lined up and everything, like when I want to go and sit there and do like a 3 day, if I wanted to go and do like a 3 day backpacking trip, I got to clear with my wife. I got to sit there and talk to my kids so that they're okay for that. I'm gone for 3 days. I got to go with this. I got to cover that. Like tons of stuff needs to line up once you have a family, once you have a relationship long term. That's, meaning once you start building a more of an adult life,
yeah,
because college, people are adults in college, obviously, but they're kind of like in an in-between stage in the sense that they're still in school, but they're also an adult. So like once you start moving into more of an adult stage of life where there's really no school unless you decide to go back to school, and then it's like you have to do your regular adult life plus school,
yeah.
There's a ton of stuff coming at you once you move into that full-on adult phase. And it's really hard to do anything. And you're like, I want to go do this. And it's like, yeah, you're going to make it happen. It's just, you have the opportunity. So like whatever things that you're interested in, whatever things that you're thinking about doing, like it's so relatively easy to do them when you're younger, and it just gets harder and harder to do things like that as you get older.
All right. Well, then let me tell you my my visceral response to that. And this is probably going to be towards the end. So, my visceral response to that is I just turned 20, right? And it's really funny because I just turned 20 and I actually dreaded turning 20. When I turned 20, I was like, oh crap, I turned 20. You know why? Because I'm entering my 20s, right? And the biggest regret of the people in their 30s is that they didn't work hard enough in their 20s. And that's one of the, that's one personality, we'll say. That's one Nick Lugo personality. But then there's the people who are 50, 60, 70 and are saying, I didn't live enough, right? And obviously the time to do that is your 20s. So
Yeah.
that's the other personality. And you know what? I could sit here and I could say, you know what? I could be hyper focused, or that's personality one, or I could be, living, and obviously that requires trade offs. I don't know, right? What is the balance between the two, and how exactly do I do that? I have no clue, and that's maybe the biggest question that I'm asking myself. Because when I turn 20, there's so many different ways that people can interpret the fact that they're in their 20s, and one of them is hyper focused, the other one is not. So I don't know.
I mean, drawing from my own life only, right? Well, maybe not only, but I'm saying, because I incorporate a lot of different information, but
your life wisdom.
yeah, drawing mostly from my own life, and I'm not that much older than you. I'm in my 30s. But drawing from my own life, what I would tell you is like this, right? If you don't need to be, you can probably get away with being focused and not hyper focused in your 20s. I don't know that it's good to be hyper focused anyways, right? I mean, we've been talking all this time about adding in play and being, when you're in that state of flow and you're not in that state of flow, there's been, I think there's been studies done even to suggest that, sometimes when people in an entrepreneurial state, right, when you're a lawyer billing your hours, 80 hours and 40 hours are not the same thing. But when you're an entrepreneur, right, the amount that you get done in a highly productive 40 hours can sometimes rival or even beat what you get done in a burned out 80 hours.
Easily.
So, you can be focused and you can also live your life. Like, you can find that medium balance, right? If you're working, let's say 7 days a week, and you're only putting in 4 or 5 hours a day, but you're getting up at 6 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to do it, and then by 11, you're free for the rest of the day, you might have to go to bed a little bit early. You miss some of the late night stuff that people go through, but you can do so much, right? I mean, meaning like nowadays with the internet and with everything that we have, like, you can go get an Airbnb and you can pick up and go to France, get an Airbnb, work for 4 hours in the morning. I mean, most of your stuff should be portable enough that you can just pack it into a thing and just go there and live there for the next month, right? And you work for 4 or 5 hours a day and you're living in France. You're going to get a coffee at the cafe around the corner every single day. I'm saying, like, there's so much stuff that's available. I mean, so you can find that middle ground, and you don't have to be necessarily hyper focused. So I was going back to like my own life.
Yeah. Keep going.
If you focus on making sure to live on a budget and saving money in your 20s, and you're focused and not necessarily hyper focused, but you're also living your life, I think you'll be okay.
Okay. That was that. I wrote that in my journal this morning. I'm a bit of a journaler, and what I wrote in my journal, and this is what I write pretty much every morning. I go between different affirmations, but one of them, the one that I ended up writing this morning, was, I will live my life fully today. And I think that's exactly what you mean, and that's just sort of the way that I interpreted it, was live your life fully. Don't live completely hyper focused. If you're living hyper focused, then you're just living one aspect of life, and life requires so much more than that. God, I have class soon. I'm gonna have to get into some philosophical thinking in class. God damn.
Yeah, but so one of the things that also there's an ancient philosopher / scholar whose name was Hillel, and he's quoted as saying, and this ties back into what we were saying before. So I mean, it's a famous saying. Everybody talks about it. I don't know if perhaps he was the one who truly originated it. Perhaps not. Whatever. Not the point. But he had 3 different statements, right? If I am not for myself, then who will be for me? We were talking about that before.
Yep.
But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? Meaning, yeah, you need to be about yourself, but most normal functioning adults can't be only selfish. They need to, in order to bring their own happiness in, they need to be helping other people, but in a healthy way. not self-sacrificial. And then the last one was, and this is talking more about what we're talking about right now, is if not now, when?
When? Yeah.
So sometimes we really have to, and you have the carpe diem, you have it coming up many, many, many ways. That's not to say you have to fit in everything, but sometimes there's opportunities that will only be available to you at that particular time, and then they just don't really become available to you later in life. Sometimes they do, right? And sometimes we start doing things and we find out that we really don't want to do that, and we have to take an assessment. And like you might go abroad and you might be like, I don't like it here. I'm not comfortable with the culture, and I like American culture, and I want to go back, and that's fine.
But it's an opportunity. Yeah.
I kind of went abroad when I was in my 20s. Not really, but like it was a weird thing. Like I moved into a house with a bunch of Israelis and stuff. So like it was a culture shock, but it happened here in Maryland. So it's like really, really strange. And but it was a tremendously positive experience overall for me. And I definitely regret that I didn't sit there and take that and actually go and live abroad for a while. I should have done that, but we can disseminate exactly why I didn't, but that's not the point. The point is that even just living with foreigners in our own country, I was able to have positive cultural influences, positive overall positive outcome from it. So being able to go move to some, because there's different cultures, and it takes a little bit of patience and like a mindset of like when in Rome, right?
Yeah.
And it takes all types. That's another mindset that I have sometimes when I see people doing stuff and I'm like, what in the world are they doing? Like I just have to sit there and remind myself it takes all types, right? Like we're a massive country, we're a massive world, and it takes all types to make a nation. Right? You don't get a place like the United States by having everybody the exact same. It takes all types.
Yeah.
And so we have to like remember that. But the overall, like the personal growth and the internal growth and the relationships that you can make can last forever. I mean, there's like a lot of positivity that can come from being abroad, going abroad, and or just venturing out into different cultures. And you'd be surprised at how many of these cultures are available for immersion here in the States. Like I've had friends growing up in college. I have friends that were part of the Russian community. So, I ended up not going too deeply into it, but like I ended up in some settings that were like very, very highly Russian culture and stuff. Like it's just a different. Like you go and you're like, oh, it's like totally different than anything I'm used to. And it's a way to open your mind and see different ways of viewing the world and different ways of experiencing the world, different ways of. It's there's a lot of positivity to.
No, well, that's the thing.
Living life fully.
Yeah.
Like you said.
I've been pushing that off. I have my dreams and aspirations of traveling when I'm older, but maybe that should be my new philosophy. I kind of like that. If you ever say you're going to do something in the future, then you're never going to do it, because I fully believe that. And I tell people
not never, but and sometimes there's limitations on resources, on time, on money, there's lots of different limitations and stuff.
Well, that's the problem, like we make plans, like I'm in the Kelly School of Business where we have a bunch of finance majors, and the finance majors, every single one of them is saying, I'm retiring by the time I'm 25, or I'm going into private equity, which is like essentially heaven for finance people, like that's the I've never worked a day in my life type of job that nobody gets into because it's so hard and because everyone wants to go in there.
Get into private equity when you have the equity.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, you have
I've got $100 million. I don't know what to do with it. Let's start investing. Do you want $50,000? Give me a good business plan.
Exactly. But
it's really hard to get into it without family money.
And that's the thing. You have people who are struggling to do essentially all that stuff, but they're saying, you know what? When I'm 25, I'm going to do this. When I'm 30, I'm going to do this. When I'm 40, I'm going to do this. But the thing that you realize is two things. One, everything doesn't remain constant. And this is where I get trapped in my own dogma, because I completely understand this, but yet I don't act this out. Things don't remain constant. Okay, yeah, you're going to retire by the 25 and you're going to travel. What if you have kids by then, right? What if X, Y, Z, whatever, right? And then you have number two is maybe your plan isn't as foolproof as you might think. Maybe you're not going to retire by the time you're 25.
I'll tell you, when I was probably 20, maybe I was 18, maybe I was 20, So by the way, retiring when you're 25 is an insane thing and almost definitely not going to happen. Not to crush dreams. Now, I don't mean to crush dreams. I'm just like, for every person that sat there and came up with some .com company that they were able to sell to Google for $1 billion, there's what, like 500 million people who weren't able to do that, you know? So like retiring by the time you're 25, that's fine. But like for most people, they should probably be filing that under like winning the lottery.
Yep.
That's not to say that you can't put yourself in many situations that may lead you to that point. But the thing that I'm bringing up, and you can't base things off of other people's lives entirely, but like I was like boasting to my uncle one time and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to retire by the time I'm 40, you know? And I thought that was like a really achievable goal. And you know, as I'm nearing 40, like you see, and you know, you see other people and the things that people go through, and even entrepreneurs and even people who sat there and created a successful business that they sold for some point of money and everything, right? They're still not retired, and they're, you know,
Yeah.
and people get very successful and they have a ton of money, right? And they want more. So the concept of, I'll tell you something else also, that, you know, retirement actually is like a made up concept, in the sense that there was no such thing as retirement until I think it was like a German chancellor, like before the Second World War or something. You can look into it. Basically, like they had this workforce and they had a bunch of people who were over 65 and they didn't know what to do with them. And so they were like, nobody's allowed to work after they're 65 anymore. And so they put everybody into forced retirement. And ultimately, like, I don't think retirement's healthy. I don't think retirement's good for people. I don't think retirement is a positive experience. I think working less and being less stressed and all that stuff is a positive experience. But like the idea of full on retirement of like, well, I hit 65 and I'm never working again a day in my life. People don't know what to do with themselves. 168 hours a week. Okay. So, you know, you have like your 8 hours of sleep a night, but I'll tell you, as people get older, they sleep less and less and less. So they've got their 4 or 5 hours of sleep. My wife's grandmother, she's no longer with us, but she would be happy if she got like 4 or 5 hours of sleep. You know, she would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, not because she had an alarm, because she went to sleep and she woke up. She's like, I can't sleep anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so like people get older and they're sleeping less and they still have the same 168 hours a week, and they're like, what the hell do I do with my time? So if you're a golfer, great, that's 3 hours a day, right? If you're this, that great, that's, you know, if this, but like the point is retirement, I don't think is the goal. I think the goal, at least in my eyes, is not retirement, but financial freedom, right?
Yeah.
Meaning if you create financial freedom, if you want to work, you can work. If you decide you want to go take a 3-month vacation, go take a 3-month vacation, right?
Well,
If you want to go,
I'll take you a step further. I'll definitely take you a step further, because it seems like the problem in what you're saying is the problem with retirement is that you have some sort of goal, but you don't really know what you're going to do with it once you reach the goal, right? You're like, all right, you know, we hit 65 and you know what, retirement, that's it, and you're kind of done. But then we were also talking about, okay, you have some sort of plan, and when you reach that sort of, you know, you're probably never going to even reach that plan, but then at the same time, you shouldn't be living in the future and you shouldn't be planning out anything. What if you just live with the mantra of every day that you live, every moment that you live should be a good one? You know, like why should you be striving for anything then? Why should you be striving for financial freedom? Why should you be striving for retirement? Why should you be striving for, you know, to retire by the time you're 25? Why don't instead you just live a full life every single day and then chalk it off after that?
yes and no. I will tell you what I've observed, non-scientifically observed, is that people who have nothing to live for don't live.
Well, that
And
doesn't mean you have
you could
nothing to
take
live
that,
for.
you could, right, but I'm saying you could take that in two ways. Number one, the people who have nothing to live for but are still living are living a dead life.
Hmm.
And number two, I've seen older people who have nothing to live for. They don't live. They just don't survive. Like they get sick and there's nothing to live for and they
There
die.
is a lot of research on that, actually. Nursing homes, you know,
Yeah.
retirement homes, all
All
that.
right. So like as much as we were saying before that goals are not necessarily a good way to like design your life, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aspiring for anything. It doesn't mean like that you shouldn't be like, oh, well, I finished with that. So what's my new project that I'm going to work on? Um, you know, one point in the story that my dad just loves because he observed it firsthand is that there was a couple of older men at the synagogue. There was an 80-year-old and a 100-year-old. Maybe
Hmm.
I'm off on the years but a little bit, but whatever. It doesn't, not that important. So the son the son was 80, the father was 100. So the son would sit there and get up, and he would do the reading from the Bible and stuff, which has to be done a certain way. And if mistakes are made, a lot of times people will call out corrections. So even though the guy's probably been doing this for 60 years or something, right? That he would sit there and be reading, and the father would yell out corrections, and he would sit there and stop and go back and do it the right way. The son passed away. Right. The father sat down and he did the 7 days of mourning for the son. And like, that was it. He passed away also. So, he hung out long enough to be able to continue correcting his son. His son was gone. He's like, I'm out of here. But so retirement, it's at 25. If, if I all of a sudden had financial freedom, I have a million things that I would do. I work with, maybe youth programs, maybe this, maybe I'm trying to sit there and set stuff up that I can sit there and give back to the world and work in the wilderness, maybe go climb a mountain. And maybe that, like, I have no shortage of things that I would go do if tomorrow I won the lottery. Right. But a lot of people don't have that. And a lot of people are like, yeah, they have this arbitrary goal. I want to retire when I'm 25 years old. And they wouldn't have a clue about what to do with themselves. So that's why it's important to, like, the financial freedom thing. And yeah, live every single day fully, 100%. No matter what, right? You're financially free, you're struggling, doesn't make a difference. You live life every single day, your life's going to be better. But just to keep in mind that, like, working towards a goal of financial freedom, and that comes back to what I was telling you before, right? If you're in your 20s and you're nervous about being hyper-focused or not, focus on saving money. Because the people who have money in the bank, right? A lot of people are sitting there and like, I'm going to get a brand new car, right? So that's 50 grand. I'm going to go and get a hot apartment. That's, 30 grand a year. I'm going to get this. I'm going to get that. And they go and they get a great job coming out of college. They make $70,000 a year, $100,000 a year, whatever the number is. And they spend all of it, as opposed to sitting there and being like, okay, I got a great job out of college. I'm making 40,000 a year, 50,000 a year, whatever. And I'm saving 20,000 a year. Because in a few years, I'll have $100,000, and that $100,000 will start doing work for me by investing it, and then getting that money and investing it. Somebody to look into about that is this guy, Dave Ramsey.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'm saying, especially at your age, when you shouldn't have too much debt, or if any at all, unless you're doing student loans. But even then, focus on getting money packed away, because that is going to be a much more, I think, contributor to a level of financial freedom than almost anything else that you do.
Interesting. Wow. I mean, there's so much that we could go on. I actually.
Yeah. Sorry, I gotta go also.
No. Yeah, I know, dude. If we're talking about flow states, I realized halfway through, I was like, damn, like this is a solid flow state. This was a great conversation. So, Ari Gunzburg, tell everybody where they could find you. This was an amazing conversation, and give them the plug.
Fantastic. So the best place to find me and the things that I'm working on is arigunz.com. That's ARIGUNZ.com. So it's arigunz.com. And then if you're interested in my book that talks about the 5 keys to greatness, it's available. You can download the first 2 chapters for free at littlebookofgreatness.com, all spelled exactly as you would expect it to be, littlebookofgreatness.com. Feel free to reach out, send me a message, whatever it is. Love to hear from people. And thanks so much for having me on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Nick Lugo Show with Ari Gunzburg. To support this podcast, please give me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And so I'll leave you with the quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful for what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we are becoming. Take care. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.